They're hungry for a discussion of the relationship between responsibility and meaning. We haven't had that discussion in our culture for 50 years. We've concentrated on rights and privileges and freedom and impulsive pleasure. They're shallow, and that's not good. If people are moored shallowly, then storms wreck them, and storms come along. I've been a clinician for a very long time, and I've tried to bring it all together and to make a case for the significance of individual life, the psychological necessity of courage and nobility and responsibility, these things that sound old-fashioned because they need to mature, they need to want to be adult, merely a consequence of the fact that YouTube skews so male. Our culture confuses men's desire for achievement and competence with the patriarchal desire for tyrannical power, and that's a big mistake. Those aren't the same thing, even a bit. So, and it's very inappropriate psychologically and sociologically to confuse them, because our primary social hierarchy structures are fundamentally masculine. A huge proportion of people who are seriously disaffected are men. Most people in prison are men. Most people who are on the street are men. Most victims of violent crime are men. Most people who commit suicide are men. Most people who die in wars are men. People who do worse in school are men. It's like, where's the dominance here precisely? There's a lot of people, I would say, who are coming to listen to what I say because they're sick and tired of having their desire to move forward in the world and to achieve something and to take their place as adult males, let's say, who are under the weight of accusations that their ambition and forthrightness is a manifestation of something that's fundamentally tyrannical. They're not happy with that. It's not doing anyone any good, and it's also not true. It's really a terrible thing to do to young men, and it's happening all the time. That's why they're bailing out of universities like mad. There won't be a man left in the social sciences in 10 years in the universities, and it's no bloody wonder. It's an unhospitable place, and it's unhospitable precisely because of this doctrine. It said that throughout history, the fundamental relationship between men and women was one of power, essentially slavery. It's like, fine, believe it if you want. It's not going to do your relationships any good, I can tell you that. The fact that there's an unequal distribution, and the problem I have with it is that the reason that men are bailing out is because of the prevalence of the doctrine that you're espousing. That's the problem I have with it. It doesn't matter that much. They will bail out. I don't see any way that the universities are going to redeem themselves in the next decade. So, and maybe that will be fine, but I doubt it because it's too expensive and the universities are doing all sorts of things that aren't acceptable, mostly ratcheting up the price. So, and decreasing the quality of what they're offering and playing into the hands of the people who are ideological acolytes of the identity politics routines and playing postmodern stunts and pushing neo-Marxism and all these things that are characteristic of the social sciences and the humanities primarily. It's a much deeper problem than that. The doctrine that the best way to view history is as the domination of a tyrannical male patriarchy, and that's true also particularly of the West, which is a doctrine I find absolutely unpalatable and historically absurd, biologically ridiculous, and ungrateful, among other things. We live in the best society that's ever been created. How can it be good if it's the consequence of a tyrannical patriarchy? Tyranny isn't good, is it? I mean, that's the definition of tyranny, something that isn't good, and yet it's produced all these things that you're grateful for. Like, doesn't that contradiction bother you? Where did what was good come from? I used to wrestle with the kids, which of course can't do now because everybody knows that would just be a catastrophe. And I used to draw them pictures of monsters and they'd line up for that. And I liked working with kids quite a lot. And I didn't care whether it was female dominated. I've been female dominated my professions my whole life. Well, I've been criticized endlessly for 2 years. I've been in scandals. I've probably been in, I don't know how many scandals in the last 2 years. Like if you put up a post and 1,000 people read it, certainly 1,000 people won't respond. A few people respond. Well, maybe it skews way over to those people who had a bad day. Like we have no idea, right? I find the constant conflict exhausting. I'm trying to do everything I can to bring people who are trying to develop a vision for their life together and to encourage them to act more responsibly, but not in a finger-wagging sort of way, but because I've come to understand that the meaning that sustains you in life is mostly to be found through responsibility. And through the voluntary adoption of responsibility, you're very likely to find your fundamental strength. And I think that that's clinically unassailable observation. And so And that's all very good, and I'm very pleased to be doing it, and it seems to be having a salutary effect as far as I can tell. But it's not because I thrive on anger. The cultures can all be put together in a single place with no overarching structure or undergirding structures. That's not the case. How can that possibly be the case? That defines the situation in the world, and the world is full of war. So how can that possibly work? If you're going to bring people together and they're going to exist together in harmony, they have to be playing a game that everyone plays, that everyone knows the rules for. It can't be 10 different sets of rules for different people. That isn't going to work. So it's absolutely naive to believe. How, if that worked, the world wouldn't be full of war.
All those rom-coms where there's always kind of a beta male guy who's being real friendly and always failing miserably with the women because basically he's lying to himself and to them. He's a persona. And a persona is the face that you show to the world when you're trying to pretend and to convince yourself and others that you're, I would say, harmless, but a good person isn't harmless. A good person is capable of anything, but is willing to hold that in abeyance. I read this interesting commentary a little while ago on a statement by Christ in the New Testament, and the statement generally interpreted is that the meek shall inherit the earth, but I was looking up the multiple translations of the word meek, and meek is actually derived from a Greek word, of course, because the Bible, at least some of the original forms of the Bible, were in Greek, and that word didn't exactly mean meek. It meant something like those who have weapons and the ability to use them, but determined to keep them sheathed will inherit the world. And that means that people who are capable of force, let's say, but decide not to use it, are in the proper moral position. And Nietzsche commented on that a fair bit too. You know, he thought of most morality as cowardice, not because morality itself was cowardice, but because most people who are cowards disguise their cowardice as morality, and they claim that their harmlessness, which is actually a consequence of their fear and inability to be harmful, say, or to be dangerous, is actually a sign of their moral integrity. And that's a really bad idea. So, you know, if you're an axe murderer but you don't have an axe, that doesn't mean that you're moral. With regards to, so that's the persona. And the persona is the mask that you wear, and that's what persona means, is the mask that you wear to convince yourself and the world that you're not a terrible monster, so that when you look at yourself in the mirror, you don't have to run away screaming. Now, the shadow would be all the parts of the personality that the persona rejects, and that might be the aggressive elements. Certainly that's the case for people who are hyper-agreeable. I think there's two pathways to the development of the shadow, and they're tightly allied with one another. The fundamental pathway is truth, and that's to face the bitter truth about yourself. But to break that down more particularly, you might think about that as the capacity to observe your own resentment. You're going to be resentful and bitter in many situations because you don't get what you want. And if you watch that resentment and bitterness, you'll see that it produces fantasies that can be unbelievably dark. And that can be very frightening, and you might not want to admit to yourself that you're actually capable of having fantasies like that, or impulses like that, or aggressive feelings like that. But the thing is that if those aggressive feelings and impulses and fantasies are integrated into your character, it's like you're opening up a dialogue with a part of yourself that can be very forceful and strong and dangerous. And it's really useful to be dangerous, because if you can be dangerous, you often don't have to be. And it's often weak people, you know, that's a very, very common.
The impact I want to have in the world is for everybody to be able to face who they are. I want to have that kind of impact where you can go on TV. You can put your life on a billboard. You're not ashamed of who the fuck you are. You're not ashamed of what life made you, what you helped life make you. All that shit, all that bad shit that's now in this big pot that's stirring, you're no longer ashamed of it. You realize we're all fucked up. Stop judging yourself against other fucked up people who have hidden it better than you. That's all they've done. They've masked their shit better than you have, and now they're flipping it back on you and saying you're fucked up. I want you to realize that this world, life, is one big head game. And once you learn to play the motherfucking head game, it's no longer a game anymore at all. You can start living your life.
a lot of times when you get hit in the head with a shackle, you look at everyone else and say, I can't believe they're doing this to me. I can't believe that you get mad. You get mad at the Navy, you get mad at the people on your tugboat, you get mad at everybody else. Right. When what you actually need to do is say, well, there's only one person I can control, and that's me. I'm the one that got myself on the back of this tugboat. I'm the one that got myself around these bunch of people. I need to do something to get out of here. I need to take ownership of my life and move forward. Right. And that's a huge difference. And it's a huge difference in mentality that can be the difference between staying where you're at. I mean, you obviously did the same thing at the gas station. At some point, you're like, being hungry sucks. Right. And I could be mad at my paycheck at the gas station. I could be mad at my car for using gas. Or I could say, hey, I put myself in this situation and I need to get myself out of it. Where's the recruiter? That's the difference between moving forward, moving up, improving your station in life, or staying where you're at.
It's better to change your environment than to even do anything else, because what happens is you eliminate all the triggers and cues that are associated with the habit that you're trying to destroy. It's like you don't even need to change cities. You can be in the same city and still change the environment. Like just moving out of your mom's basement, you know what I mean? And just going into another place with 4 guys can change the environment. 25% of soldiers who went to Vietnam tried heroin. It was like an insane statistic. And in the US, 90% of heroin addicts who go to clinics relapse. So they have a 10% long-term success rate. Tough. People are in the environment that they are addicted. They change environments and they go to a clinic. They change the environment, they change their behavior. And then they go back to the same environment and their behavior changes yet again to match the environment. And so it's like, if you want to change your actions, the easiest thing you can do is just change the environment. Because if you can do that, a lot of times, a lot of the negative things you have, you just don't get triggered. You don't get the cue for the behavior. It just gets extinguished. The stats are completely reversed from people who got addicted or did heroin in Vietnam and then came back to the US. If you want to start a habit, like for me, one of my quote famous ones is like, I want to put sunscreen on. It's like this time, it's like one habit that's like 80-20. So it's like, okay, I don't like it. I realize the reason I don't like it is I don't like oil on my hands. It sounds so stupid, but like that's enough punishment for me doing it that I stopped doing it. And so I had to overcome 2 things. One was that I hate the oil on my hands, and the second is that I don't remember. So I put 1 thing of sunscreen at each of my watering holes. So I get cued because I see it as soon as I sit down. So I eat lunch at the same table, I work at the same table, and I'm on my nightstand. Those are 3 places that I spend my time. And so I have 1 in each of the 3 places. And then the type of sunscreen I have is that I have one that's dispensed through a thing, so I don't actually have to touch it. So it's like, do I know why? It's like, if you can identify why you don't like doing something, then you can isolate, why am I being punished for this behavior, and think, okay, is there a way I can fix it? And the other is, how can I cue myself on a more regular basis by changing my environment rather than setting an alarm on my phone where if it goes off right now in the middle of a podcast, I'm not going to pull out suntan lotion, or I'd have to carry everything with me, which I would never do, right?
What's the difference between the amateur FIFA player and the pro FIFA player? The pro has put his existential connection to his content and the success of it.
And so people who are most successful, a lot of times, it's not that they necessarily have more willpower. They find other ways to reward themselves. Somebody can extend how long their time horizon is because they do gamify it. So people who don't have the skills of figuring out ways to reward themselves in the meantime can't make it the whole way. But that's like when you're doing cardio and you're like, okay, it's 5 times 5 to get out of here, right? You create micro games within the longer game to keep yourself going. And the more ways you track, the more ways you can win. And so it's a little thing that I found out. So like if you track 100 stats, then you only need 1 of them to go up so you feel like you made some progress. So that's like an easy one. And the second thing around the tracking is that I would look at like the biggest possible number. And so that's why it's like the more ways you track, the more ways you can win. And then I think that's those little micro wins can keep you going over the long game that you have to just keep playing. It's so scary, we avoid it. We avoid it. But it's like, I think the faster you can kind of build that muscle of like, I've got this hesitation. What is the real reason? Because like logically, I can do that whole thing. Cool, you have nothing to lose. You're poor. Great, 0, right? Okay, but then what is it that I do have something to lose? It's relational capital. It's status within my tiny micro community that doesn't matter, but like my perceived status. Okay, name the names. But by pulling it out from the shadows, and so I think it's getting really specific and really narrow on because people say it's society, it's other people. It's like, it's usually 1 or 2 voices. And if you can get really specific on whose voice it is, then you can name it. And then like, I think I'm a big believer in like shame only exists in the shadows, which is like, once you put it in the light, you look at it and you're like, my mom? Your mom, you sit down at Thanksgiving dinner and you haven't made money yet and you quit your job. Now what? is that better than you spending the next 60 years hating her or resenting her for the fact that she held you back? But like that confrontation from here to here is, I think, where all the fear is, because it's embarrassing to be like, it's my mom. Your belief that you're going to be viewed as a failure by your uncle be the sole reason that you live the rest of your life below your potential and regret everything that you don't do because of Uncle Tom. Yeah.
And that's when you're starting out. People that are concerned about becoming a content creator, I'm worried about starting a podcast because what if everyone sees how shit my podcast is? It's like, dude, no one's going to see your shit podcast. It took me 3.5 years to get even an appreciable amount of people listening to this show. And it was effort 3 times a week. No one cares when you start. So you can be liberated from that as well. And it's just objection handling all the way down.
So like when we're doing a podcast, if you start, you're like, hey, I'm going to do a podcast, I'm going to post it. It's practice for me getting better for future me. Rather than like, this is the main game. It's like, no, the game is the whole thing. And this is just like, we're still in preseason. Like these scores, these touchdowns don't even matter yet.